Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, to this Pinfa webinar on what are safe and sustainable flame retardants. We're still admitting some members of the audience to the meeting, so hang on, we will start in a moment. Yeah, it won't be long. We already have almost 100 people in this call, and look very much forward to discussing this topic with you. I think should be good to go, even though people are still coming in, but maybe Francesca, shall we get going? Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone, and we want to welcome you to our webinar, What are Safe and Sustainable Flame Retardants, organized by Pinfa, the Phosphorus, Inorganic and Nitrogen Flame Retardant Association, a sector group within Cefic. But before we start, I want to remind you that this webinar is organized over 3 different days, on June 27, on June 28, and on June 30, from 4 to 5 p.m. As you can see from the agenda, each day we will host different speakers. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Adrian Beard, Pinfa Chairman, Filipe Almeida, Product Stewardship Director, and Laurent Tribut from Schneider Electric. Sorry, there is a... Second.
Something happened, Francesca? Or?
Yeah, there is a thing with the sharing of the screen. Just 1 second.
Okay.
Sorry for that. Okay. 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 No? Okay. Now it works. Yes. Okay.
We don't see the screen yet. It's not sharing.
Okay. So I'm sorry for that. So today, as I said, we have the pleasure of hosting Adrian Beard, Pinfa Chairman, Filipe Almeida, Product Stewardship Director, and Laurent Tribut from Schneider Electric. But before we start, I would also like to make some recommendations. So first of all, please keep your microphones and camera off. And should you wish to ask questions, please consider that there will be a specific time at the end of each presentation devoted to the questions and answer. And you can post your questions in the chat and I will relay them to the speakers. In case of due time constraints, some questions cannot be answered. So don't worry because we will respond later by email. And please note that this event will be recorded and available later. And in conclusion, I would also like to remind you that questions about prices and production volumes are not allowed. Because this meeting is held under Cefic competition law rules. So thank you very much for the attention. And at this point, I will leave the floor to Adrian Beard, who is our chairman of Pinfa, who will explain us what is Pinfa. Thank you very much for the attention. Over to you, Adrian.
Thanks so much, Francesca. Yes, here in a nutshell on the slide, who is Pinfa? It's the, as Francesca said, Association for Non-Halogenated Phosphorus, Inorganic and Nitrogen Flame Retardants. We have more than 30 members. We can already go to the next slide, perhaps. And yes, we were established in 2009, so already 13 years in existence. Here you see our membership across the continents, not only in Europe, also in China, North America. We have sister organizations. And as Pinfa, We work on joint projects and activities related to fire safety, environmental topics, eco-labels, recycling, and communication activities around our technology, our common technology of these PIN flame retardants. So with that, and perhaps next slide, Hanan, there's also people behind these logos. Here, a group picture. We had recently our first in-person General Assembly after 2 years of COVID interruption. And below the group picture, you see the leadership team comprised of members from various companies, and also Francesca, our sector group manager, and Hanan, the assistant who's helping us today and who also helped upfront organizing this, this event. You can follow us and find us on social media and on the web. Here are the addresses just for references, easy to find. But without further ado, again, back to you, Francesca, to let us jump into today's program.
Okay, thank you. So as we said, today is the first day of our webinar, and we are happy to introduce Filipe Almeida. Filipe Almeida joined Cefic in 2020 as Product Stewardship Manager, dealing as an expert of polymers, registration under REACH, endocrine disruptors, and supporting the activities on microplastics. But since April 2022, Filipe is now Product Stewardship Director in charge of the Emerging Issues Cluster. So over to you, Filipe. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you for the invitation, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to give you a small, very brief overview of where we are in terms of the chemical strategy for sustainability, and I'm going to focus primarily on two main points. The first being the CLP regulation revision, and the revision of the REACH regulation, so that you get an overview of the two of the main actions from the CSS. So, and if you go to the next slide, as I mentioned to you, I'm going to start with the CLP, which is, for those who are not familiar, it's the classification, labeling, and packaging regulation. There are several aspects within this regulation that are currently under revision or new additions to the regulation. So the first one and one of the main points in the regulation that we anticipate coming with the revision is new hazard classes. In this case, the Commission is aiming at including 4 new hazard classes. 2 for endocrine disruptors, 1 for human health, 1 for environment, 1 hazard class for PBT and VPVB, so persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxicant materials, or very persistent and very bioaccumulative, and also for PMTs and VPVMs, so persistent, mobile, and toxicant, or very persistent and very mobile substances. And of course, the criteria that will allow to identify based on data which of the chemicals fit or match the criteria for the 4 different new hazard classes. This is the main part of the CLP revision, but it's of course not the only one, and I'm going to give you also an overview of the rest. So one of the other points that is that's going to be included, or at least being considered for this CLP revision, is the obligation to provide information for some hazards on the label for products that are currently outside the scope of CLP. Basically translating this, there are certain regulations which are sort of exempted from following the CLP in terms of the labeling part. For giving an example, the cosmetic products, you don't see the pictograms that you normally see in some chemical like in detergents. Here, the idea is to bring those regulations that are exempted from this aspect of labeling into the CLP regulation. For us here at Cefic, giving you the idea, our position, we don't have a clear position on this because we feel that it's not up to us, but to the different sectors that are affected with this change to discuss with the Commission whether it makes sense or not. So we are keeping ourselves a bit far from this discussion. The other point is around what's so-called MOCs, or more than one constituent substances, and the classification of the obligation. No, sorry, clarify the obligations to classify these mixtures and some of the complex substances. The idea is you have some approaches that are being proposed for the CMRs, for human health and the aquatic toxicity, but there are some ideas how to, or the idea from the Commission to implement this into a more generic for other hazard classes, and not only for these two, but these two have also different approaches. So it's a bit unclear. This point has been in and out all the time from the discussion. So at the moment, it's not that clear whether it will make the cut at the end or not for the CLP revision. The other key point is, and that came with the COVID situation more, is online sales. And the idea is really to bring specific rules for online sales that will bring closer to the offline sales, basically. So we do support this, that the requirements for products that are on the shelves in the supermarkets or in shops should be the same as the ones that you buy online. So this is basically the idea behind this proposal here. And then the harmonized safety values for some substances, the DNELs, the DMELs, and the PNEX for the environment. Basically, you have these calculations being made in the different pieces of regulation. The Commission wants to harmonize so that you go into the approach of one substance, one assessment, and that's the idea behind this new proposal that might be included in the CLP revision. I say might because we haven't seen yet the final text. We don't know what made the cut until the final proposal, but this was what was impact assessed. So it should be at least included somehow in the proposal, either for a later stage or for the revision now. So if you go to the next slide, there's also the requirements from importers and downstream users to submit information on substances. Now, this is more made on mixtures, but the Commission always also wants to address substances here. So that's the aim with this bullet point. Now, another point that Commission thinks about to include in the CLP revision is the request for ECHA to develop a new harmonization of classification and labeling, or the CLH dossiers. We feel that this might be a good idea, but we are very worried about the resources that this would require. Normally, the classification is done by the RAC, but then you would need really specific experts to deal with different subjects, to different substances, and a lot more resources. So this is a bit of a resource issue here if you follow this approach. And not that we are in favor or against, it's more of a concern how to really apply this part. Then, of course, the labels for the small products, in particular, if you go into, let's imagine cosmetics being now under the CLP regulation. Sometimes the packages are quite small. How do you put all the labels and all the requirements that are needed there? So there's also this fold out labels and tailored labeling rules for small packages that are being considered for the CLP. And finally, the prioritization mechanism for harmonization of the classification of certain chemicals. So in general, these are the ideas and the main points for the CLP regulation. Go to the next slide, please. But again, bearing in mind that the main point here is, of course, the new hazard classes that are being considered for the CLP regulation. So this is a tentative timeline, and please always look at this in a tentative way. There's always might have some delays, so be careful how you look at this approach, this timeline here. But the idea is that the impact assessment was performed. The regulatory scrutiny board in May approved the proposal for the impact assessment for the CLP regulation. So we are now waiting for the legislative proposal coming from the Commission, most likely towards Q3 of 2022. So either some might come still before the summer break, end of July, others might come at the beginning of September. Then there will be public consultation still for the delegated acts at least, because there will be two, the delegated and the OLPs. And then there will be towards more the end of the year, the final decision adoption for the delegated acts, and then the discussions with the Parliament and the Council on the rest. So this is CLP, and if we move quickly, because I'm seeing the time, if we move quickly to the REACH, so that one and that one, exactly. Thank you. So the REACH, there are several actions going on. It's a much more complex revision, as you might expect, compared to CLP. You have the part on the registration, which basically is extending that data on properties, use and exposure, and improve safety assessments. One of the key points that is going to be addressed in this registration part, the new part of REACH, is of course polymers. They have been exempted from registration from REACH since the beginning, but we knew that they were coming, and so now they will come with this revision of REACH as the registration of a certain number of polymers. It's not for all. But there's also data requirements for EDs. You remember I mentioned there was new hazard classes under the CLP. They rely on existing data in the dossiers and the REACH, and of course they will extend the data requirements to include the EDs. And there's also some discussions about what to do in terms of improving the data for the low volume substances. Again, strengthen the safe use assessment for the non-thresholds, and one of the key points under the REACH revision, which is the mixture assessment factor of the MAF for some of the combined exposure. On the authorization, of course, we will get new SVHCs coming from the new hazard classes for EDs, the PBTs, they already are, but PMTs, normally we should have, at least for EDs, only one category being SVHC, but it's still under discussion. There is going to be the GRA, the generic approach to risk management, now focused only on the CMRs, but it will be extended with the fast track restrictions for other SVHCs. There will be the concept on essential use. So some of the derogations under the restrictions rely on the concept of what is essential in the product to make the product or society for society. And so this is another concept coming from the REACH revision. Finally, the evaluation, and you get the full legal compliance and enhanced evaluation procedures coming for compliance checks of the dossiers, revocations, testing by authorities, and also improve and streamline procedures. So this is really to make the process faster and more better, basically. And again, the part of the communication and the safe use along the supply chain and control and the enforcements in particular for or including also, not in particular, but also for imports. If you move to the next one, we at Cefic did our own assessment for the CSS, our economic analysis on the impact of some of the actions from the CSS. What you see here is the outcome of the phase 1, which was published in December. I'm not going to take that long to go through this, but basically the findings say that we have as many as 12,000 substances that could be potentially in the scope of this generic risk approach for restriction approach for risk management, or the GRA. The impact for the chemical industry around 43% of the total turnover, and that would include a sort of a 12% market loss on the industry's portfolio by 2040. So when you start talking about how many substances are impacted and then how can be replaced, how others that will be taken out of the market, the last figure is the 12%. And this impact really showed that although we are not saying we are against these actions, it's more about we need time to do and to apply all this, because I went through very quickly through all the actions, but you can see there are a lot of things happening and the industry needs time to adjust and adapt because all of them come at the same time. No one, even ECHA or the Commission, will not be able to deal with all the information and the changes that will happen. So what we are discussing with the Commission, and the Commission will also be proposing something later on, probably, is this what we call the transition pathway that will sort of prioritize, and then we have a sequence of the different regulatory measures that have been discussed and will come into force with at least these two revisions, more also from the rest of the CSS that I'm not focusing so much today. And I think the final slide will be the timeline. Yes, it's a bit difficult, this slide, because it just shows how complex the REACH revision is at the moment. These arrows are all studies that are going on at the moment at the Commission level. And what happens is basically the Commission is now preparing their impact assessment under the good, I'm missing the word now, for when they have to perform the impact assessment before coming with a legislative proposal. So that's what they are doing, the impact assessment, and then the better regulation. Now I remember, under the better regulation rules, you do the impact assessment. It should be done by July. Then it will be adopted or discussed at the regulatory scrutiny board after the summer break. And we anticipate that the proposal for the REACH revision will come around end of this year, beginning of next year, and then of course will go to the Parliament and Commission for adoption, and that can take, as you know, these processes are long, especially in a complex piece of regulation as REACH. It can go on for 2 years maybe until the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission agree on the final text and it's adopted. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that should be my last slide. Exactly. Sorry if I took a bit too long, but there's a lot of things happening here. Thank you.
No worries, Filipe. Thank you very much. Very good, very, very interesting. And maybe I would like to address one question that we received, and the other we will reply by email afterwards. So do you know if the OEL will be harmonized between European countries?
The ordinary OEL.
Occupational exposure limits.
Thank you. I don't have an answer to that question, to be honest with you. I don't know. It's not one topic that I'm not covering. As you can imagine, I'm not covering all of these topics that I've just presented to you. So maybe what I can propose is to come back to you with an answer on that question, because I don't want to say something that might be completely wrong, as I'm not focusing on I'm not following closely that part.
No worries, Filipe. We will address later. Thank you very much again for your participation.
Thank you.
And I think we can move forward, and I can give the floor to our chairman, Adrian Beard. So a brief introduction. Adrian Beard is head of market segments for the flame retardant business line of the business unit Additives of Clarion. And he is a senior expert in fire safety and environmental properties of phosphorus-based flame retardants. And since 2017, he is the chairman of Pinfa. So thank you, Adrian. I give the floor to you.
Thanks a lot, Francisca. And hopefully I can make up a little time. But no worries, we have a little buffer in the schedule. Yes, let me introduce to you our Pinfa roadmap for flame retardants under the chemical strategy for sustainability. With the next slide, just a brief reminder where this is all coming from. You see here there's different policy areas: climate neutrality, chemical strategy for sustainability, which is linked to Sustainable Products Initiative, Zero Pollution Action Plan, Circular Economy Action Plan. So that is all linked to the Green Deal as the overarching policy initiative. And if we go to the next slide, let's then zoom in from the big picture to the smaller picture. Flame retardants, what's so special about them? What is, say, peculiar about flame retardants as a group of chemicals is that they describe a function and are not really a chemical entity or chemical composition, because here in this chart that we often use to explain how flame retardants work, you can explain that different flame retardants work by different mechanisms, working in the gas phase where the fire occurs. They can do something to the surface of a burning piece of material polymer. And there's these feedback loops, thermal feedback. There's production of smoke, which can be impacted. So very complex phenomena. And if we go to the next slide, this effect can be achieved, if you look to the right-hand side, with a variety of chemical substances and based on different key elements that will reduce the propensity of a material to ignite, and that will make it more difficult to ignite a material. And that's the function of flame retardants, to make it more difficult to ignite a otherwise easily or more easily flammable material. And here you see highlighted in color the key elements that can be used in such substances. On the halogen side, chlorine, bromine, but then phosphorus, aluminium, boron, magnesium. So extremely broad. Also, when you look at the organic chemistry, there's also inorganic chemistry like aluminium hydroxide, but organic chemistry can be aliphatic, aryl, substituted in different ways, because all of these different chemistries achieve this effect of lowering the flammability, or stated otherwise, increasing the energy you need to start or to put something on fire, to ignite something. Yeah, so that just as a background, this is really a very mixed bag of chemicals we speak about, even if we look at the non-halogenated portfolio, again, very broad. Yeah. And if we look back, how flame retardants came to the attention of environmental scientists and regulators, it goes back to the late 1990s and started with findings of many brominated flame retardants in the environment. And that has led over the last more than 2 decades to some regulatory action, also restrictions on some chemicals. And if we compare flame retardants to other chemicals that are being debated, we are amongst, say, the top groups that are being discussed. Just mentioning some here, like the perfluorinated compounds, PFAS, bisphenol A and derivatives, or plasticizers, phthalates. So we're not alone there. Yeah. And going to the next slide, a year ago, we also did a webinar where we asked people, or the audience, in one word, what do you see as the key aspect of safe and sustainable design for fire safety? And here you see the results. The bigger the font, the heavier the font, the more responses of the same buzzword or keyword. So we are coming out low hazard, safe, recyclability, environmentally friendly, low hazard potentials. So it often relates to this aspect of safety of the chemical as such. And what also sticks out is this recycling circularity aspect, which is rather new or has been new coming up over the last couple of years. Going to the next slide. Under the chemical strategy for sustainability, there's a new concept that was introduced, the concept of safe and sustainable by design. And this idea was to move away, or not move away, but to build on the idea of a safe chemical as defined by hazard properties of the chemical, to also look into other dimensions indicated on the left-hand side with this donut. So at 11 o'clock, you see this traditional safety, chemical safety, but other elements should also come into play, like what's the environmental footprint if we go counterclockwise of this product. That can mean water footprint, waste generation. It can mean impact on climate and others. what's the economic value, what is the performance in use, and what's the social value of such a product. And that all together, taking this life cycle approach, can then lead to an assessment. But you immediately see that might be very difficult to grasp in one number, or to do that quickly and easily. But the Commission has worked on this topic. Here on the right-hand side, you see this mapping study for the development of safe and sustainable by design criteria. That is available on the web, and by now also JRC, the Joint Research Center, has also published a review of criteria and systems, how this could be performed, this assessment that goes beyond the pure safety or chemical hazards of the chemical in question. Going to the next slide. Yes, this is the latest proposal from the Commission and JRC on safe and sustainable by design assessment. This scheme that is shown here that builds on these 5 steps, where you see, as I said, basic step is chemical hazards. Then it goes into what about the processing safety, occupational safety and health aspects. Then on the right-hand side, step 3, human health and environmental aspects from the use phase. And then environmental sustainability, so looking at the whole life cycle. And lastly, a social and economic assessment. So very broad and kind of a 360-degree assessment of a chemical that goes very much beyond what we and others have done traditionally. As Pinfa, we have put a lot of effort and work into the hazard assessment, step 1 here. We have also been engaged in studies, projects that looked at life cycle assessment, but as that is quite challenging and needs a lot of data, that is not an easy thing to do, but it will come and it will be required more and more as we go forward. We go to the next slide. Another aspect of the CSS that we, as the flame retardant community, will need to deal with is eco-design, and here a quote from the proposal. So currently it's just a draft, it's a proposal for an eco-design framework, and I copied into here onto the slide the definition of substances of concern, a new category. So far we are used to substances of very high concern that are defined in REACH, but substance of concern is a new concept which lowers the bar in terms of criteria, and you see these criteria all listed here on the right-hand side relating to toxicity, environmental endpoints, and the like. But I'd like to draw your attention to the very last point. C, negatively affects the reuse and recycling of materials in the product in which it is present. That is a very broad definition here. Anything that impedes recycling can be any pigment, any filler. If I think of plastics, talc, glass fibers, and of course flame retardants. Yeah. So is anything that negatively impacts recycling, mechanical recycling in particular, is that already a substance of concern? I would say question mark. Yeah, I think that should be definitely looked at more carefully and also defined then for the products in question that each individual eco-design regulation looks at. Going to the next slide and coming now to what Pinfa is doing, or what we have set ourselves as a working plan or roadmap to do in future, apart from following these topics that I just showed to you, that are really very recent new developments. So other topics we want to address and are going to in the coming months and also years are topics like persistence versus durability, which will be a specific topic on Thursday, where we have a presentation. Another thing is safety information and data sharing with not only our downstream users. We could, I think, improve that, because a safety data sheet is not everything or does not tell you everything. It also means sharing information on ingredients in finished products, digital product passport, just to mention a buzzword that is also related to eco-design directive just mentioned. So we need to think of creative and good ways how that can be done whilst protecting confidential business information. That's always the counter point to free and open sharing of composition of materials and recipes. I think what's also important, third point, their intended uses, to make clear that flame retardants have a certain purpose and are intended for certain uses, and there could also be uses that are advised, that we advise against, and that these materials should not be used in. And then last point, important versus essential use. Essential use is a new concept under the CSS discussion that is meant to grant exemptions for chemicals that are seen as problematic, and currently it's very hotly debated around the PFAS chemicals. So the idea to grant exemptions or grant use of such problematic chemicals if their use is deemed essential, so essential for society, for the benefit they bring, and the fact that there is no good alternative that can be used. So that's a topic we also look into, but this whole discussion on the concept is still in flow, and also the exact legal definition of that. When we look at what is under the blue arrow, commitments to sustainability, we have made an effort within Pinfa to motivate all Pinfa members to sign up to the Cefic program on dossier quality, REACH dossier quality. We also had a look at substances of very high concern and how they could be more avoided, and that Pinfa members don't actively promote such substances should they still have them in their portfolio. And then under the orange arrow, projects, which means bigger initiatives, activities, like work on further proving the safety of PIN flame retardants with further data and studies and making that publicly available. Working on topics like safe and sustainable by design, what I just showed you, this JRC concept. They are doing pilot studies now where we as Pinfa members, or some Pinfa members, have volunteered or indicated that they would like to also join these efforts and collaborate. And then last point, recycling of flame retardant materials is becoming more and more important, where we have also dedicated projects in this area as Pinfa. And there's also a dedicated presentation on Thursday, I believe, on that topic in our webinar on Thursday. Good. With that, we go to the next slide, which brings me to the conclusion already. So the chemical strategy in relation to flame retardants, I think, poses opportunities. It should, and that's what also the Commission pronounced and stressed. It's not only the threat of more regulation and more difficult regulation, making everything stricter. It's also the idea to promote innovation and market acceptance of more benign chemicals, and in our case, flame retardants. Of course, we as industry have the challenge to address and manage substances of concern and of high concern, how to deal with them properly. Another point here, a level playing field with imports from outside of Europe, I think is very important, and also enforcement of these rules we have to keep in mind. And I think that's something peculiar for Europe. We come up with extremely complex and complicated legislation and laws, and the question, can it be enforced, can it be checked, is often not really taken into account. Yeah. So it leads or stays to some degree in the theoretical domain. Yes, and the last point, Pinfa, we actively contribute, are willing to contribute to this process, and are open to collaborate with regulators, scientists, and do that in various projects. And also via these webinars like today, to engage with stakeholders on these topics, get input, feedback. And with that, thank you very much for your attention, and also looking forward to any comments or questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for your interesting presentation. So I don't see any question. Okay, no, we have a question. So on the point of alternatives, as a chemical cannot be essential if there is an alternative, how are alternatives going to be assessed, and by who? Will chemical alternatives be assessed, or also not in kind alternatives, for example, completely different product that fulfills the same function?
Yes, I'd say a complex question, but I think the topic of assessing alternatives is always one of, is a material, is it equivalent in performance? So can it do the job as an alternative, but also is it available in commercial quantities? Is it also commercially a viable alternative, or is it 3 times as expensive as the original substance? So all these factors come into play. And also currently, flame retardant plastics compete with, say, non-flammable materials. Yeah, and it's the choice of a producer of a part, and maybe Laurent can also comment as representing an OEM who produces parts, yeah, and who has to choose which material do I choose now for this switch box or wall box or other piece of gear, and then there are many requirements that may conflict each other, and then you have to compromise for a certain material. So that is always the case. I think what we do need is incentives for choosing the better alternatives, and sometimes it also needs hard restrictions to phase out bad chemicals and products, because we have also we see and have experienced that old chemistries are used as long as legally allowed and acceptable, even though there are much better alternatives, but they may come at a somewhat higher price, and then they just don't enter the market or real life world. Yeah, so there needs to be these guidelines or a certain attractiveness to use better chemistry, and there need to be, I think, also hard regulations that limit the use of chemicals that are no longer state of the art, where much better materials exist. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for your
Welcome.
answer. And I would move forward, giving the floor to Laurent Tribut. So a brief introduction to Laurent. Dr. Tribut is a polymer expert, and since 2020 he is polymer expert for power breakers application in materials and environment corporate team. He is also a member of different IEC standardization working groups and member of the advisory board of Pinfa. So I would give the floor to you, Laurent.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really happy to be able to share with you the Schneider Electric view regarding safe and sustainability, flame retardant, and plastic. I have very few number of slides, so then we will have enough time to discuss and answer the question. Maybe next slide, please. So before entering into discussion about safe and sustainable flame retardant and plastics, I would like to highlight here a Schneider sustainability program, which has been launched by our CEO in 2021. And in this Schneider Sustainability Impact Program, we are dealing with different pillars, some regarding the climate, with a clear ambition of reducing the CO2 impact of the company, but also the CO2 emission of our 1,000 main suppliers. So we are working in collaboration with this supplier to help them to reduce at the maximum their CO2 emission. We have one specific pillar regarding resources, and it is this one that I will deep dive later in the presentation, and some other regarding the trust with our strategic supplier and confirming that they are providing decent work to their employee, on the equity and gender diversity, and also create some opportunities for next generation. So all of these different pillars are dealing with sustainability at the corporate level for Schneider Electric. But next slide, please. If we enter into the discussion, oh, sorry, can you come back? I forgot the most important. So regarding the resources, we have two specific targets. The first is to increase our green material content in our products up to 50% before 2025. And I will show you on the next slide what we mean by a green material within Schneider. And the second is the use of single-use plastic and also recycled cardboard for 100% of our primary and secondary packaging. Next slide, please. So, as you probably know, there is no official definition of what is a green plastic worldwide, and then we had to work internally to define what is a green plastic for Schneider Electric in order to avoid to make some greenwashing and claiming that we are using green plastic without any specific definition. So first of all, we decided to include as a prerequisite to this definition worldwide substance regulation requirement. So all our green plastic will be REACH, RoHS, and POP compliant at worldwide level. So it will not be limited to Europe, but also for China, Asia, or North America. We will ask for the material to be compliant with this regulation if our supplier want to claim that the material is green plastic. Then we will have two different cases. The first is the material is halogen-free. And once again, for this halogen-free definition, we are using a specific standard, which is EN 50642, which is a European standard, which originally is dedicated to a cable management system. And we decided to implement it also for other products. And the specificity of this standard is that it is targeting the four halogen, chlorine, bromine, fluorine, and iodine, while in the majority of the current standard around halogen-free, we are just dealing with chlorine and bromine. And the criteria for this for halogen is between 0.1% and 0.3% weight percent in the compound. So if the material is REACH, RoHS, and POP compliant, and if the compound is halogen-free, then we have three different options to be green plastic. The first option is to have more than 20% of recycled content in the material, in the plastic as a compound. So it can be either the resin, the flame retardant, the glass fiber, or other specific component which is recycled. We decided not to focus specifically on the resin in order to provide some possibility for also for filler manufacturer to work on recycled material. The second possibility to be green plastic is to have more than 20% of bio-based content. And in this case, we decided to exclude food competitive sources. So it will just be generation 1.5, so the residue of food and other generation that will be included in the definition. And the third option is to use a green flame retardant. And why we decided to add this criteria is because around 50% of the material used within Schneider Electric are flame retarded. And it is also, and it is because of a very hard requirement in terms of flammability, but also sometimes some specific regulation for electric and electronic product. And we decided to add this criteria in order to also check that it will not impair the future recyclability of this material. And we will see on the next slide that it is this green flame retardant has also to be defined, and we defined it internally. And if the material is halogenated, we decided to raise the bar and increase the recycled content up to 50% or the bio-based content up to 50% in order to limit the number of material which can fulfill this requirement and accelerate the recycling of this material. So in addition to this criteria, we are also requesting our raw material supplier to provide a full life cycle analysis when it is available. This life cycle analysis is used to make a comparison between the different options, because sometimes we receive some proposal for the first option with recycled content, sometimes with bio-based. And then in this case, we consider other criteria like the CO2 impact or the water depletion and the global warming. So it's here what is a green plastic for Schneider Electric, and we share this definition with our main suppliers, and we receive daily some proposal from them. So next slide, please. So as you have seen, we had this criteria regarding a green flame retardant, but once again, we do not have a definition of what is a green flame retardant. So we decided to use green screen assessment methodology, which is starting to be quite famous worldwide. This methodology, for people who are not really aware of this methodology, is considering 18 different environmental and human health endpoints. And this methodology is ranking substances in different benchmark with a score from 1 to 4. And the one being substances which need to be substituted as soon as possible to better substances, but still good to be replaced. Benchmark 3, already a very good material, and 4, the best in class. And there is internal decision has been to follow the TCO positive list, which is also based on green screen assessment methodology. But while TCO is proposing in the positive list benchmark 2 and 3 substances, internally we decided to go just for benchmark 3 and for the flame retardant, but also for the additive. In the green screen scoring, there is no benchmark for flame retardant, so we can consider that it is the best in class currently available on the market. And what does it mean, reducing the selection to a benchmark 3 flame retardant? It means basically just 4 flame retardant remaining. It can be either magnesium dihydroxide or ammonium polyphosphate or diethyl phosphonate of aluminum. And some phosphate which are emerging from time to time. So it is very restrictive, and it is a voluntary decision internally to go for this very high requirement, in order to be sure that in 5 to 10 years we will have a high chance of success that this material will be recyclable. Next slide, please. But in addition to this green flame retardant and green plastic definition, we are also working on specific eco-design best practices internally. What we are focusing on is to try to reduce at the maximum the use of flame retardant material when it is possible, and be in just enough performances. So it means checking in the standards what is the real requirement, and if it's requiring flame retardant or not, if there are some plastic with a low combustibility which can also play the role, to answer the question of previous attendees. The second point is probably a reduction of the multi-layers in our product in order to simplify the recyclability. So all coatings will be challenged in new products, and then we hope that it will simplify the sorting and recyclability and recycling of our product. And the third point is the use of single flame retardant without synergist when it's possible. Why we want to push in this direction is first to simplify the marking, the traceability, and the recycling. Because if we have multiple substances, it will probably be more difficult than to separate and purify if one of these substances start to be regulated in the future. Next slide, please. And on top of all of this, I have some requests for flame retardant supplier regarding sustainability. So as you noticed in my presentation, we have no worldwide accepted assessment methodology for the environmental impact of flame retardant. So what could be good is to try to define officially a worldwide risk assessment methodology. For sure, we would prefer that it will be based on a green screen, but maybe it can be also a global decision to modify a little bit this assessment methodology and have other organisms which help to make this global assessment methodology deployment. The second request is to try to work on the recover or reuse of flame retardant, because for the moment when we have a recycling process like pyrolysis or solubilization of flame retardant material, the flame retardant is considered as a waste, or still considered as waste. But we can see that we have more and more issue regarding supply of flame retardant and shortages for flame retardant, but also for other additives. And then it's good to consider that these sources of recycled flame retardant can be a way to be more resilient. And the third request would be to simplify the recyclability, if possible, by developing more single flame retardant, try to avoid as much as possible the use of synergists, and also to improve the marking transparency, because under FR40, for example, we have many different substances or with and without synergist, and then for recycling purpose, it will be probably a problem in the future. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for your attention, and I'm ready for your question, if any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurent. So I have a question here on the chat. If you could please repeat which 4 flame retardants are class 3 for Schneider?
So it is a magnesium dihydroxide, MDH. It's a DEPAL, diethyl phosphonate of aluminium, and ammonium polyphosphate. As far as we know, that's the one which are in TCO positive list. Maybe there are a few others which are under the FR40 designation, but at least these 4 are the one we are aware of, and we know that we are using in our product.
And maybe just to comment, FR40 and the other FR51 and so forth, they refer to the ISO standard, ISO 1068, I think it is, that defines or that categorizes flame retardants into chemistry.
Yeah, it's true that I am using the ISO and I did not refer it to. So
okay,
thank you.
Just to explain,
Yes.
Good.
And just as an advertisement, tomorrow we have a presentation of TCO, so they will probably explain a little bit more about what is the positive list and what are the criteria behind.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Laurent. So we have another question. Removal of synergist may impact other properties and cost. Is Schneider ready to compromise?
Yeah, it's a good question. For the moment, no. So what we try to achieve is to keep our specification out there. And if we do not find any possibility on the market to answer this specification, then we can consider to, and we will deep dive into the specification to be 100% sure that all the requirements are at the right level, let's say, and then we will for sure consider other possibility. But as a best practices, we will go first with the same requirement, with the criteria I just provided in my presentation, and then we will consider other options if nothing is available on the market.
Thank you very much, Laurent. Adrian, you wanted to say something?
No, I think time's up. I think we have to come to a close. Thanks again, Laurent, and also Filipe earlier. And also we saw some more questions coming in, but we're very conscious of time. As Francesca said in the beginning, we will try and get back to you by email or the presenters of the individual presentations on these specific questions. Thanks again for joining. A great number of people joined today. I saw 125-ish, yeah. So great. It would also be super great if you could join us again tomorrow, same time, same place, same internet, but different speakers. Thanks again, everyone, for joining, and looking forward to see you again tomorrow. And hear you. Thanks a lot, and take care. Bye-bye, and all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.